In the middle of what is now central Iraq, near the modern city of al-Diwaniyah, in the governorate still called al-Qadisiyyah, there was once a small town by a canal and a flat stretch of fertile ground. In the early 7th century, people knew that place simply as al-Qadisiyyah. It was one of many villages in the rich Sawad region, the green, irrigated strip along the Euphrates that fed the Sassanid Persian Empire. Today, if you fly over this region, you see a patchwork of fields, irrigation channels, and villages, ordinary life in the heart of Iraq. But somewhere on that soil, in or near what is now al-Qadisiyyah Governorate, an army of early Muslims and the field force of Sassanid Persia fought a battle that would decide who ruled Mesopotamia and, ultimately, whether the ancient Persian Empire would survive. The battle is remembered as al-Qadisiyyah. To understand why this obscure town became a turning point, we have to look at the world around it. For centuries, the Sassanid Empire had dominated Iran and Iraq, ruling from cities like Sitafan, al-Madain, on the Tigris. To the west lay the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. Between them, the fertile lands of Iraq were both a prize and a battleground. By the early 600s, both great empires had battered each other almost to exhaustion. Long wars between Heraclius's Byzantium and the Sassanids under Khosrow II had left fortresses ruined, treasuries drained, and armies thinned. Just as those struggles ended and Heraclius retook the true cross to Jerusalem, a new power appeared from the south. The Arabs of the Arabian Peninsula, united under Islam. Under the first caliphs, Muslim forces began to move into the borderlands. At first, they raided. Then, they stayed. They took Hira, an old Arab city under Persian influence, and began to settle in the rich lands along the Euphrates. To Yazdegerd III, the young Sassanid king, this was intolerable. Iraq was not just any province, it was the empire's breadbasket, its route to the Gulf, and the approach to the capital itself. Skirmishes turned into battles. Muslim and Persian forces clashed along the frontier. Neither side could leave things as they were. Eventually, Yazdegerd ordered his most experienced general, Rustam Farrukhzad, to assemble a large army and drive the invaders out of Iraq. Rustam was no ordinary commander. A member of a powerful noble family, he had fought for years in the wars against Byzantium. Now he gathered troops from across the empire, Persian heavy infantry, Armenian and other auxiliaries, elite cavalry, and a corps of war elephants intended to terrify and crush enemy lines. Slowly, this army moved toward the Euphrates and the fertile plain near al-Qadisiyyah. On the other side, the Muslims also prepared. The Caliph in Medina, Umar ibn al-Khattab, appointed Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas to command the Iraqi front. Sa'ad was a companion of the Prophet Muhammad, a veteran of earlier battles, but at Qadisiyyah he was in poor health, suffering from an ailment that left him unable to fight in person on the front line. He would direct the battle from a raised platform near his tent, relying on messengers and trusted commanders like Kaka ibn Amr. The Muslim army that gathered at Qadisiyyah was smaller than the Sassanid host. Its men were mostly Arab tribesmen, lightly armored compared to their Persian counterparts, but hardened by desert warfare and inspired by their faith. Many had already fought in Syria against Byzantine forces and in earlier clashes in Iraq. They knew they were facing the main army of a centuries-old empire on its home soil. The ground on which they would fight was very different from the rocky plateau of Yarmouk or the mountains of Persia. al-Qadisiyyah lay in the irrigated lowlands of Iraq, where water flowed through a network of canals off the Euphrates. The land was mostly flat, broken by ditches and channels, with palm groves and fields nearby. Canals could be obstacles and cover, both at once. As the Sassanid army approached, dust clouds rose on the horizon. War elephants, unfamiliar and terrifying to many Arabs, loomed among the troops. Rostam established his camp with care, erecting a richly decorated command pavilion and keeping his battle standards near him. Zoroastrian priests came with him, tending sacred fires and blessing the army in the name of Ahura Mazda. Sa'ad's camp, by contrast, was simpler. Rows of leather and cloth tents near the canals, horses and camels tied among the lines, women and children of the tribes sheltering at the rear. For many of these people, there was no secure homeland far behind them. If they lost here, there was no guarantee of a safe retreat. The first day of battle began with the thud of elephant feet. Rostam sent his elephants forward in a line, their massive bodies bearing towers with archers and spear-wielding riders. To men who had never seen such creatures in war, they must have seemed like siege engines. They moved across the plain, trumpeting and shaking their armored heads, tusks capped with metal. The Muslim front ranks braced themselves. Some tried to stand firm. Others hesitated as the great beasts drew near. When they hit, they crushed men and shields underfoot, broke spear lines, and threw horses into panic. Persian infantry poured in behind them, hurling javelins and arrows, then closing with sword and spear. All along the line, the Muslims strained to hold. Dust and screams filled the air. Somewhere behind, Sa'ad listened to reports, his illness keeping him from the saddle. He ordered reserves forward, tried to shore up weak points, but by the end of the day, it was clear the elephants had done terrible damage. The Muslims had not broken, but they had suffered heavily, and many were shaken. That night, the atmosphere in the Muslim camp was tense and quiet. Men gathered in small circles, talking in low voices about the elephants, about what they had seen, and how close they had come to rout. Some wondered aloud if this was the day their advance into Iraq would die. Then, a new group arrived, reinforcements under Kaka ibn Amr, a commander known for his courage and quick thinking. He brought not just fresh fighters, but new ideas. In urgent councils lit by lamplight, Kaka and other leaders discussed how to neutralize the elephants. They would have to change tactics, target the animals' weak points, disrupt them before they reached the main line, and sow confusion among their handlers. Blacksmiths worked through the night, sharpening spearheads and making hooks. Archers and javelin throwers were instructed to aim for the elephant's eyes, trunks, and legs. Some sources even describe using camels draped with cloth to frighten the animals with unfamiliar shapes. When the second day dawned, the battlefield looked the same. Flat ground, the enemy drawn up in front, the looming shapes of elephants. But the Muslims were not the same. This time, as the elephants advanced, Kaka and his men rode out in small groups, striking at vulnerable points in the Persian line, then galloping away. Light troops skirmished aggressively, focusing on the elephants. Javelins and arrows flew toward trunks and eyes. Under the pain and confusion, some elephants began to veer away, others turned back into their own troops. The results were messy and unpredictable. A few elephants still broke through, causing havoc. Others ran sideways or backward, trampling Persian skirmishers and even disrupting their own cavalry. Muslim fighters closed on any elephant that went down or faltered, stabbing at its joints and finishing it off if they could. By the end of the second day, the elephant corps was no longer the unstoppable terror it had been. Many animals were dead or out of control, others had been pulled back. The Persians still held the field, and their infantry remained formidable, but one of their key advantages had been blunted. The third day saw grueling infantry combat. Without the elephants to break the lines, Persian heavy infantry had to advance on foot, relying on their armor and discipline. The Muslim infantry, learning from each clash, used their mobility and the canals to offset the Persians' weight. Along ditches and irrigation channels, men fought at close range, slipping in mud, pulling each other down into the water, stabbing and grappling. Lines surged and retreated. No one gained a clear edge. The sun beat down on steel and skin alike, and the dust of Iraq stuck to blood and sweat. That night, both camps were half silent with exhaustion. Burial parties heaped the dead into mounds. Wounded men moaned in the dark. Some accounts speak of omens and dreams reported to Saad, visions that the tide would turn, that patience and steadfastness would be rewarded. Whether these stories are literal or symbolic, they reflect the fragile morale at this stage. Neither side could easily fight many more days like this. On the morning of what would be the final day, the weather changed. A strong wind picked up, carrying dust and fine sand across the plain. Crucially, it blew from the direction of the Muslim lines toward the Persian army. For the Muslims, with wind at their backs, the dust stung but did not blind. For the Persians, facing into it, the dust and grit blew straight into their eyes, filling their mouths and noses. As the wind rose, the Muslim lines moved. Cries of Allahu Akbar carried on the gusts. Infantry surged forward once more. Cavalry under commanders like Ka probed the flanks. Without the elephants and with reduced visibility, the Sassanid troops found it harder to coordinate their movements. Rustam, somewhere behind his front, tried to impose order. Couriers ran back and forth. Commands to wheel, to advance, to hold were shouted into the wind. But the longer the fighting went on, the more cracks appeared in the imperial formation. At some point in that fourth day, the battle reached Rustam himself. Some accounts differ in their details. Some say a sudden Muslim attack, shielded by dust, broke through to his command position. Others describe a pack animal laden with gear, stumbling and overturning his canopy, knocking him to the ground where he was killed in the confusion. However it happened, the result was the same. Rustam Farrukhzad, the king's champion and the army's central pillar, was dead. A Muslim fighter found his body, dragged it out from under fallen equipment, and raised a cry that carried through the nearby ranks. The great general had fallen. Word spread like fire on dry grass. Among the Sassanid troops, hearing that Rustam was gone was like hearing that the backbone of the army had snapped. Men who had fought fiercely for days now looked around and saw not an ordered line, but a dusty haze full of enemy shouts and dying comrades. Command structures began to fail. Units broke off on their own, first pulling back, then running. Saad's messengers brought him the news. From his raised platform by the canal, he gave the orders that would turn confusion into rout. Cavalry rode hard into the gaps, chasing and breaking fleeing units. Infantry pressed forward, shouting, as Persian lines disintegrated. The flat lands of Qadisiyyah, once neatly divided into farms and irrigation channels, became a chaotic maze of escape attempts. Persian soldiers tried to flee across canals and ditches, some drowning in the water they had once used to irrigate their empire's breadbasket. Others were cut down as they ran. A lucky few made it out, heading for Ctesiphon with the terrible news. On the Muslim side, fatigue warred with elation. Many had lost friends, brothers, fathers in the struggle. They knelt down among the bodies to pray, to thank God for survival and victory. Others moved quickly to gather weapons, armor, and prisoners. The battlefield was a horror, but also a tipping point they had hoped for. When the dust settled, al-Qadisiyyah was no longer just one more town in Iraq. It was the place where the Sassanid field army in the west had been shattered, where the road to Ctesiphon lay open. After the battle, Sa'ad led his forces along the Euphrates and then toward the twin cities on the Tigris, Ctesiphon and Seleucia, together called al-Madayan. Yezdegerd fled eastward as the Muslims approached. The ancient royal city, with its great arch and palaces, fell with surprisingly little resistance. The court, the treasury, the symbolic heart of Sassanid power in Iraq were gone. In the years that followed, the empire itself would continue to resist, especially in the Iranian highlands. There would be more battles, Jalula, Nauavalent, and more stubborn stands. But al-Qadisiyyah marked the beginning of the end. It was the moment when the balance in Mesopotamia tipped decisively away from the old Zoroastrian empire and toward the new Islamic order. Today, if you drive through al-Qadisiyyah Governorate, past the city of al-Diwaniyah and along the canals and fields, there are no great monuments shouting, "Here fought Sa'ad and Rustam." There are road signs in Arabic naming the province after the battle, farms with green patches amidst the desert, and Iraqi families going about the routines of life. Archaeologists and historians debate the exact spot. Was the old town of al-Qadisiyyah under this field or that one? Did the main line run along this canal or a channel now long since filled in and moved over? The Euphrates has shifted, canals have changed course, and centuries of cultivation have smoothed and reshaped the land. In museums in Baghdad and elsewhere, you can see Sassanid helmets, chainmail fragments, coins stamped with kings' profiles, and early Islamic weapons from the same period. Labels mention battles and dates, sometimes including the name Qadisiyyah. In university classrooms, maps trace arrows from Medina to Hira, to Qadisiyyah, to Ctesiphon, telling the story in a few tidy strokes of ink. But the reality on the ground in 636 or 637 was not tidy. It was days of choking dust, the terror and confusion of elephant charges, the desperate efforts of lightly armed men to adapt to a new kind of war, the sudden vacuum when a great general fell, and the realization, slowly spreading through both camps, that something irrevocable had just happened. The old name, al-Qadisiyyah, belongs to that moment. The new name, al-Qadisiyyah Governorate, al-Diwaniyah, belongs to the people who live there now. Between them lies a thread, a reminder that ordinary landscapes can be the stage for the fall of empires, and that under the irrigation channels and wheat fields of modern Iraq, the echoes of battles like Qadisiyyah still lie, faint but enduring, in the soil.